The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host and or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of the host and or Paranormal Buzz Radio and or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is prohibited. Paranormal Buzz Radio will not be held responsible for you holding your knees, crying, and rocking in a corner in a puddle of your own urine, or being beheaded by a group of children in a cornfield. In fact, if you come across a group of children in a cornfield, we promise to make fun of you as you run away screaming in terror. Listener discretion is advised. Caution. You are now entering the all-consuming realm of Shay's Paranormal Chat, where the things that are better left unsaid are actually said.
Shut up and sit down.
You're listening to Shay's Paranormal Chat. Paranormal podcasting done Shay's way. Tons of fun.
Dude, seriously?
A bit sarcastic.
Hashtag investigator, not hunter.
But always real.
Hashtag data, not evidence.
Don't get your panties in a twist.
Oh my god, really?
This is real, raw conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Good evening, everybody. TGIF. I am so happy to be with you here on this Friday. And I'm very excited about tonight's show. Tonight we have, as a co-host, Mr. Darren Buss. Hey, Darren. How you doing?
Good. How you doing? Glad to be back.
Yes. I always appreciate when you're on with me.
Ready to rock and roll with this show tonight.
I know. I'm very excited for a couple of reasons tonight. Number one, this is an awesome guest that we have coming up and awesome subject. But I've been on the air for 3.5, 4 years, and the only show I've ever missed of my own is when he was on the first time. His name is AP Sylvia. He's a author, and we're going to be talking about vampires and misconceptions and all kinds of different things. We'll give out the title of the book in a second, but I felt so bad. It was a little over a year ago. I was so sick, and I didn't want to cancel last minute, and Kim and Allison filled in for me. It's the only show of mine I've ever missed in all the years I've been doing this. So he's given me another chance to make up for that, and he's smiling. So, you know, Andy's here, so that's a good sign. But, so, AP, how you doing?
Doing well, thanks. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I am very happy you were back. I felt so bad. It was either that or cancel last minute, and I didn't want to cancel on you last minute. So.
Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I understand the last time, and it was a good show. We had a lot of fun.
Yes, Kim and Allison are awesome. I don't have just anybody on my show as co-hosts. As you know, I have a few good, awesome co-hosts, but I had to cancel that night, and Kim and Allison are great. So. I just want to give out a few quick shout-outs in the beginning of the show. The first people that joined us, of course, are Matt, Mallory, my mother, which we call Mama Deb, and Allison. Thank you, guys. Those are the first ones in chat.
Hey, guys. Glad you guys can make it and join us tonight.
Yes, it's going to be fun. And for anybody that's a permanent listener, they already know I broke my glasses, so I can't really type or read very good. But so if I say anything, just let me know. But AP Sylvia, he's the author of Vampires of Lore, Traits and Modern Misconceptions. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, Oh, wow, this is such an awesome subject, but what got you into vampires? What got you to the point that you had to write this book?
Yeah, well, I've always been interested in ever since I was a kid into like supernatural things and ghost stories and stuff like that. And if ever there was a spooky show on TV, I wanted to watch it. I was that kind of kid, so I've always had an interest in watching documentaries and things as the years go on. But for me, what really got me on the vampire track was a few years ago, probably a few years ago now, something like that. Time flies. I was in New York City, and I went to the Ripley's Believe It or Not museum there. Yeah, those are really cool. There's a bunch of them around, different parts of the country and such, and they're full of sort of oddities and strange objects and things like that. And so one of the things they had there, they had this sort of antique looking box, and it was filled with these vials and whatnot, and it came with there was a stake and a cross and stuff like that, and it was labeled as a 19th century vampire killing kit. And I thought it was really cool. It just was a very sort of striking piece, and just great imagery with it. And I just love the idea of it. Is this kit that someone's carrying around? And supposedly people would take them to if they were going on trips to Eastern Europe or something like that. So afterwards, when I got back, I was thinking more about that kit, and I started, I took to the internet, started doing a little research. I wanted to learn more, and I found out that there was some controversy surrounding them in terms of their authenticity, whether or not they are actual period pieces from the 1800s, or, as some assert, if they are sort of 20th century constructions using the pieces from the 1800s. Right, so the argument would be somebody sort of took a box and a this and a that was period to the 1800s, assembled it together and said, oh, this is a vampire killing kit from the 19th century. And one of the arguments sort of for that more modern construction was that people would say, well, the stuff in the kits kind of represents kind of the movie vampire or something like that, rather than the vampire from folklore. And I thought that was an interesting kind of assertion. And I had known just from watching, different documentaries and stuff that there were differences between kind of what we thought of as vampires from TV shows and stuff, and what, the actual beliefs were of the past. And so I started looking into it, and I was like, well, I want kind of a breakdown. Someone give me a breakdown of every sort of trait that we associate to vampires and sort of where it came from. Was it from folklore? Was it from TV or movies, or what have you? And I couldn't really find anything like that. No one seemed to have that or sort of packaged in that way. And so I wound up doing this research and writing this book, the book that I sort of wanted to read when I started on this thing, where I go through all, sort of trait by trait of these, of our sort of modern associations of vampires, and try to determine sort of where they came from.
Nice.
Interesting. That's just... the Ripley's is a really cool place. I mean, just all the different artifacts, like you were saying. I mean,
oh yeah, they're great. I mean, it's all kind of a lot of neat things. I mean, stuff people have built, and of course they've got shrunken heads and stuff like that. There's it's neat. There's a lot to see. And so I've been to a couple different ones. There's I went to another Ripley's out in Hollywood, and they also had a vampire killing kit. So I wanted to make sure I checked that one out as well. So yeah, they're cool if you're around one, or you're on vacation somewhere where one is.
Nice. Now, last week Darren laughed at me, really laughed at me, because he asked how I was preparing for the show, and I told him, now I have to say it's twice, but at that point when he asked me last week, he said, how are you preparing for the show? And I said, I watched all the Twilight movies. And now I've watched them twice since then. So is that going to help me tonight or no?
Probably not.
That's what he said. Yep.
Well, see, I grew up watching the old Dracula movies and Fright Night and stuff like that, and then also reading about Vlad the Impaler. Mm-hmm. And that always struck me interesting. But his is kind of a different kind of way of how he did his his work to protect his castle in that kind of way. And of course, with Elizabeth Bathory, that's another one that struck an interest.
Sure, yeah. I mean, those are those are kind of historical characters that often come up in kind of vampire discussion, especially if you're watching maybe like a documentary or something like that. Those are they're often brought up. So there's sort of a couple kind of things to chat about with both of those historical figures. Vlad the Impaler. A lot is made about Vlad the Impaler and Count Dracula, right? So people often say like, oh, Stoker based Count Dracula on Vlad the Impaler, and he that's kind of where he got the idea and all this stuff.
Uh-huh.
So Vlad the Impaler, I mean, just to kind of give some backstory to him. So he was the prince or the voivode of Wallachia back in the 1400s. And he's known historically for having kind of being a very brutal ruler, having a very brutal reign. So he was known for impaling thousands of people on pikes and stuff like that, and other kind of brutal acts and whatnot. But of course the thing to kind of put him in perspective is that he was in a very precarious situation. He actually he had kind of Hungary to one side of his country, which was kind of this major power. He had the Ottoman Empire to the other side. Wallachia is kind of caught in the middle. He had like rebellious nobles and stuff like that. So he from his point of view, had to come from a position of kind of absolute strength. And he actually reigned 3 separate times. He like lost his throne and regained it. So that's kind of just kind of a quick thing about Vlad. So the other thing about Vlad is his name. His name was Vlad. He would be known as Vlad Dracula, or Vlad III, or Vlad Dracula III. His father took on the name Dracul because his father was a member of this order of knighthood, the Order of the Dragon. So the father took the name Dracul. Then Vlad, his son, took the name Dracula. The la meaning like the son of the dragon.
Okay.
So the thing that sort of Stoker knew, Stoker actually didn't know much about Vlad the Impaler. That can be proven. A lot's been hypothesized about, he knew about the impaling and this and that. But the only thing that really has been proven for certain, and for this I referenced the work of Dr. Elizabeth Miller. Stoker, we know he read in this, doing his research exactly, he read in this library, this book. It was like the histories of the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. And it has like a quick reference to Vlad in it, mentioning that he was a ruler and that he fought the Turks and had victories or whatever. And his name was Dracula, and Dracula means devil. And so Stoker read that reference to Vlad in this book, and he took the name Dracula and he wrote it in his notes, Dracula means devil, and he wound up naming his main character Dracula. Before that, the character was going to be named like Count Vampire or something like that.
Wow.
So he took Dracula, great name, nicely done. But that's kind of it. And it's funny because if you actually read from the book, the little section about Vlad, and then you read Dracula, there's a point in Dracula where Van Helsing talks about who Dracula was in the past. And he mentions that basically what Van Helsing says very much mirrors what this book says. And you can very much kind of see the influence that book had on Stoker and his writing. But that's actually about it that can be certain for Stoker. And there's really nothing else in the novel that kind of comes out and says anything else kind of profound about the history of the real Vlad or something like that. Mm-hmm. So based upon that alone, it kind of seems like Stoker really didn't know much. One of the things that often gets Vlad associated to vampires was there was a poem written about him in the past where it said that he would dip his bread into the blood of his victims and eat it. But that, again, from like some of the work from Elizabeth Miller that I've read, that apparently was a mistranslation. And the poem actually said that he washed his hands in the blood of his victims. Again, creepy thing to do.
Yeah, right.
But not vampiric. So no one in the 1400s believed that Vlad was a vampire, like a vampire like we think, right, like that. They thought he was, a ruler to be feared for sure, but people didn't think he was a vampire. The vampire association kind of came from Stoker, and then modern scholars kind of piecing that together of Stoker was influenced based upon this. And from what I understand in Romania today, Vlad is actually considered to be kind of like a national hero or a folk hero or something like that. I guess because he fought to keep his country safe and sovereign. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So there's kind of one of the main kind of historical figures that gets brought up. I think you also mentioned Elizabeth Bathory, or Countess Bathory. So she was around. I think it was like late 1500s into the 1600s. So she historically is known as a very prolific serial killer. As the story goes, she would employ like peasant girls as servants and stuff like that. And there was this tale that she kind of somehow got the idea that their blood would keep her young or youthful or something like that. So she was bathing in their blood and stuff like that, or she was torturing them and whatnot. And so this went on for a long time, and a lot, supposedly a lot of these servants died, and then ultimately I think she started taking on servants who were of noble descent, and started doing the same thing. And so then it kind of that got more attention to it, and she wound up getting put on trial. And there were supposedly like 300 witnesses against her or something like that. And, there was supposedly some book she had kept where like all the names of all the victims, and people had supposedly found, people who were victims or like close to death or whatever in her castle. And so some of her cohorts, I believe, were executed. And she was walled up into one of the rooms of her castle. And she died sometime later, imprisoned, walled up. There are some scholars that do argue that maybe it was that it was not that she was innocent of these crimes, and that it was all kind of this big. It was kind of just like this story to like get her out of power, essentially. I'm not sure. I would sort of. It was hundreds of years ago. It was a long time, so it's hard to know. Like they had a trial and all that, and there was people were testifying against her. But again, it's hard to know what happened back then. But so there's kind of the two. There's some discussion about it. So she also comes up again because of the connotations to blood. But she wasn't believed to be a vampire, right? Like we think of vampires, right? Like she wasn't undead or anything. She was, if you believe the accusation, she was a very prolific serial killer who may or may not have had this association to blood. That again, the bathing in blood might have been sensationalized or something like that. So those are kind of two characters that do come up.
Yeah.
That's kind of all lumped together.
Yeah, well, I think they do all get lumped together, and I think with Vlad the impaling, and then the Stoker thing, and then with the Countess the blood thing, this association to blood, and so the vampire to blood association is very strong, I think, in our minds, right? Like if anything sucks blood, people will often refer to it as like a vampire or liken it to a vampire, right? Like even like like a chupacabra or something like that. You hear that's like exactly. It's like a vampire. Yep. When it's drinking, it's sucking blood or supposedly, but it's not undead or anything like that. And so that actually was when I first started doing my research for the book. However long ago it was now, it was. That was something I kind of had to contend with sort of early on. It was like, well, what the heck is a vampire? Mm-hmm. Because when you start reading about vampires and you read some of these books and stuff like that, a lot of different kinds of creatures and beliefs will come up. And, there are like monsters that, this monster, it lived in the woods and it would attack travelers and drink their blood, right? Stuff like that. And so I kind of had to figure out like, well, what am I going to consider to be a vampire for the purposes of my book? How am I going to address this? Because there's a lot of different stories that come up and a lot of different beliefs. And so for me, I wound up coming up with like 3 criteria that for my purposes would be, here's how I define a vampire. They have to meet these 3 criteria. And this I felt kind of weeded out some of these other kind of tangential things and sort of allowed me to focus on the stories that I felt resonated most and spoke to kind of the psychology of what was going on. So the first point was that, the vampire is the corpse of a once living person. Right. So the vampire used to be a real life person who had a life and they lived in a community and did stuff. And now they're dead. Right. So that
immortal being.
Yeah. Well, they're now they were a real person and now they're believed to be in this other state, this undead state or something like that. Mm-hmm. And that kind of cuts out a lot of like the, they're not like spirits or demons or monsters that were never human to begin with, right? Because there's lots of tales of like just these supernatural creatures that are like demons and stuff, but they were never human. So to me, I'm like, all right, well, I'm not gonna count them for this. And then the second criteria was that the corpse is harming the living in some way. So I actually broadened it out a little bit beyond just the blood drinking, because there's many accounts where people believe the corpse was causing harm in different ways, whether they were strangling people in the night, whether they were sort of just draining the life in kind of this more abstract way, or causing other kinds of mischief, or causing like droughts and stuff like that. So I think all of that kind of whatever sort of harm the corpse was doing, to me it was relevant because it gets to the point that people feared the dead. There was a fear of the dead in these accounts. And then lastly, my third criteria was that to destroy the vampire, action has to be taken against the corpse itself. So if you wanted to rid yourself of this vampire problem, you needed to do something to the corpse that was in the ground in the cemetery next to the village. Like the vampire isn't like a ghost that's kind of untethered or something like that, right? There was a physicality to the vampire, and there was a physical thing that people could turn to and look at and go, this is the root of our problems, or so they believed. And this kind of take out those fears against the corpse. And so that's kind of where I landed for my analysis of vampires in the book. And I kind of go through those points in the book. And obviously there's other things that might deviate a little bit that, I'll bring up if I think are relevant or something like that. And, talking about Vlad. Well, Vlad wasn't a dead guy. But he's an important figure to kind of frame everything.
Right. Do we have any questions in chat?
Not yet. Allison's in chat and saying hello, though. She's the one that interviewed you last time.
Yes. Hello, Allison.
And she said she loved doing it.
Yeah, it was great. We had a great conversation.
Yeah.
So what do you feel like how some of these movies portray of how they tried to destroy a vampire and all this stuff? Did you find some kind of back story on that as to what is actually tried to be used to do this sort of act?
Sure. There were a number of different methods people would use in the past to, destroy, or what they believed were destroying vampires, right? And it's important to frame this like, we often think of vampires as sort of these fictional monsters and stuff like that, but there have been times and places where people really believed that vampires were real, that they were a real threat to them, and they carried out exhumations where they took action against corpses and stuff like that. And, some of these accounts are very well documented. There's newspaper articles about them and stuff like that. Some of them are kind of, sort of just general beliefs or kind of foggy lore, but other ones, it's like very clearly written out. Here's what happened and here's what they did. So it's pretty surprising. So there were a lot of different methods. Some relate well to what we believe, others not so much. Probably one of the maybe most iconic ways to get rid of a vampire would be a stake through the heart.
Yeah.
Right. That's pretty big in most movies, right? You see, you have the the vampire slayer kind of creeping into the crypt, with kind of the wooden stake in one hand and the mallet in the other, right? And they're gonna
garlic and all that stuff.
Yeah, all that. There's a lot of stuff like that. So it's interesting because even when I would find that there was a folkloric precedent for some of these things, there was often nuance to it, and maybe things that have been lost over time, right? So with the wooden stake, right? There were some places that believe that was the case, but oftentimes the type of wood used was believed to be important. So it wouldn't necessarily just be any wood. Depending on the place, it might have been hawthorn or blackthorn or oak. They thought that the type of wood used was important to killing the vampire. That often, the explanation for that is most likely there were religious connotations to those types of wood. Like they believed that like this type of wood was used during the crucifixion or something like that. So most likely using that wood kind of imbued it with like a spiritual power.
Right.
And then, sort of the whole notion of like, going through the heart, right? There's definitely, beliefs that, the heart, the heart was kind of, it's a blood-oriented organ and it's central to life and all that. So there were beliefs about destroying the heart in general, not even staking it, but just destroying it. So I think the stake through the heart definitely resonated with the destruction of the heart. But if you read some of the accounts, they actually say something kind of interesting, sort of specific about staking the vampire. They'll say they stake the vampire. Pinning it to the ground is used at times. So the act of staking it was oftentimes thought to like you would stake the vampire through the body into the ground underneath it, such that it wouldn't be able to sit up anymore, wouldn't be able to rise out of the like kind of you're holding him in place.
Kind of like the part in was it The Exorcist movie where the guy with the spear would come right through him? Was that The Exorcist? I can't think of what movie that was.
I have no idea.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know either.
There was a part of the movie where I saw where this thing was like lightning struck and it pierced this guy straight through. He's just standing straight up with a stake straight through him.
I'll have to think. I'll have to write that down.
I have to think what movie that was. I can't remember.
So there's some, so there's a case where like, in some movies we watch, it's more like, oh, you just stake the vampire through the heart. Even if he was lunging at you just kind of poke him through the heart.
They would
Yes, and they kind of just crumble into dust and that's it. While with some of the folkloric beliefs, there's again more nuance. Other places they would be staking the vampire in the stomach, or sometimes they would use metal rods, and there were all kinds of different sort of different things again depending on kind of where you go, because the vampire beliefs were they were spread out throughout different countries and in different places, and so everyone kind of has their own sort of take on it. You know what I mean? Because these are supernatural beliefs, so they can sort of change and evolve over time. But so staking's one. We mentioned garlic. Yeah, garlic actually has a very strong precedent in folklore.
In general, not just vampires. It has.
There was going back to ancient times. There were beliefs about the powers of garlic, and they could be used to dispel certain kinds of animals or evil or what have you, and they had health benefits and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily surprising that this belief about garlic sort of moved into the realm of vampires, since there's already been a lot of kind of associations or beliefs surrounding garlic going back, again to ancient times. One of the interesting explanations for garlic being useful against vampires that I found that I thought was interesting was it related to the smell. Right, garlic has a very very pungent smell, very potent that can mask other smells. Vampires, being dead, were often thought to smell bad, so the presence of garlic, the smell of the garlic was thought to kind of mask the smell of the vampire. And sort of somehow through magical means, it was then thought that by sort of dispelling or overpowering the smell, you dispelled or overpowered the vampire itself. So there was kind of this extrapolation in magical thinking that went on with the garlic. And I find that fascinating. But yeah, there were lots of beliefs. People would take garlic, they would rub it around their windows and to keyholes and things, any sort of entrances to their homes and whatnot, and rub it on animals and stuff. And yeah, that was certainly a strong one.
Interesting. What do you got, Shay?
How did we go from vampires turning into bats and repelling them with garlic to the romance side of them, to them being beautiful, angelic, and you have to burn them. Like, when did it change from they were these bad, nasty things to now all of a sudden they're beautiful and
it's definitely been a bit of a 180.
It has been.
Yeah, the vampires, they've got good PR, I'll say.
Well, it's also all about sex appeal too.
Yeah.
I mean, well, so I think you can kind of see the evolution happen over time. So originally, in sort of folkloric beliefs, vampires were scary. There was nothing attractive or alluring about vampires at all. People were deathly afraid of them. The vampire shifting to being kind of alluring or mysterious or what have you kind of happened with 19th century literature. So probably the first work that really started doing this, there was a novella called The Vampire. It was written by a guy by the name of Polidori. And essentially this novella introduces this character, Lord Ruthven, who's this kind of mysterious nobleman and has this sort of appeal, and people are drawn to him and stuff like that. But then kind of the main character ends up sort of traveling with Ruthven and slowly realizes that he has this very destructive, this destructive influence on people around him, and ultimately realizes that Ruthven is in fact a vampire. And so this novella kind of introduces this notion of this kind of sophisticated, suave, alluring vampire. The book, the novella was originally attributed to the famous poet Lord Byron, and that's probably why it became popular, because Byron was this was the early 1800s or 1820s maybe. So Byron was very popular, and this book comes out, and this is a work by Lord Byron. Well, no, it was a work by Polidori. Polidori was actually the personal physician to Lord Byron, and apparently the two men did not get along at all. So the theory is that Polidori based Lord Ruthven on Lord Byron, and both men tried to set the record straight, but kind of the damage was done and whatnot. So with the writing of that novella, The Vampire, you see the shift, and that shift continues throughout the 1800s. There's a Penny Dreadful called Varney the Vampire, which has this the main character is Sir Francis Varney, again this upper class fellow, and then ultimately at the end of the 1800s you have Count Dracula, right? Again this mysterious nobleman or whatever, and I think what happened there is that very much appealed to the Victorian readers of the time, and that resonated with them. So their fear of this undead person in a farming village or something like that probably wouldn't have been particularly captivating for them to read a story about. But this notion of a vampire that could infiltrate society, infiltrate high society, and they're of the noble class, so they've got influence. That probably made for a better story for those readers, because this was like a threat. This was like kind of a more exciting kind of character. And so you kind of see that trend happen in the 19th century literature, and then obviously once we get into films and all that, Count Dracula has this huge impact, right? And so then you get Bela Lugosi, right, in Universal's Dracula, being suave and elegant and all this stuff, and wearing this evening attire and all that. And I think it just kind of it went from there. And the interesting thing that I've just sort of seen with vampires, looking at it all, is that the notions of the vampire have just sort of grown and changed and adapted and evolved to sort of just meet the needs of what people were looking for at the time, whether it was like the villagers who needed to explain some kind of illness or plague or something, to the Victorian readers who were looking for something more sensational that would kind of speak to them and where they were culturally.
And you talk about the Victorian vampires and stuff like that. It's so funny because I actually was looking at being a Victorian vampire for Halloween this year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Didn't go for it, though?
No, my wife said no.
Oh, what?
She said, "You already got your mask on."
That's too
But I
funny.
mean, there are very some unique costumes for that. I mean, it's just how in depth they go with a lot of that stuff.
It also depends on whose perception you're going by.
Right.
Because everybody's perception of a vampire is different.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing about kind of modern vampires. It's been interpreted in a lot of different ways now in different movies and shows and books and stuff like that. And different creators will take their own spin on it. And so then you kind of, maybe someone's going to have a vampire that's more like kind of Victorian elegant, or maybe one's in high school or something like that.
Like Edwin Cullen.
Yeah, exactly. So it just depends.
I mean, I also contend with Dark Shadows because that's one of the biggest ones, right? TV shows.
Yeah, that was a really big show. Was Barnabas Collins? I think was.
I believe so. Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, was the vampire on that? Yeah. So there you have kind of and again, I think he kind of takes on kind of a tragic hero kind of slant over time and stuff like that, which I think people also find compelling with vampires. They like the tragic hero kind of thing, and I mean, and that also happened like in like the mid 1800s with Varney the Vampire. Like he was kind of a tragic hero at times. So I think people like that, and the vampire aspect adds a dimension to it because they've got this they're living or unliving with this curse. They have to drink blood and do these things, but you can portray them as sort of unwilling participants in it. They're driven to it or something like that. So I think it's good fodder for writing and stuff like that.
Yeah. And, with these younger kids these days, I mean, they're looking more for, like she was saying, Twilight and stuff like that, being more on, like I said before, the sexual appeal side of things.
Sure.
I haven't seen anything that's kind of brought back the oldness of vampires lately.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to think of anything that's really well. One thing I liked recently was the BBC Netflix Dracula miniseries. Yeah. It was like a 3-part miniseries that was British a British show. And that was really cool. I think it's kind of had a polarizing effect on people. Some people you kind of like really like it or really don't or whatever. I really liked it. I thought it was cool. I thought it was a very interesting kind of reinterpretation, reimagining of the Dracula story, where they start out with Harker going to Castle Dracula and meeting the Count and all this, but there was some really interesting interpretations there, and it ultimately takes the Count into the modern day in the 3rd episode, which I think I liked. The first episode I really liked. The 3rd episode I didn't necessarily like it as much, but I thought they did a good job with it, because I think oftentimes when you do like a show where like you take a character from the past and plunk them in modern day, there's a lot of like cliche kind of stuff you can do or whatever. But I liked how they framed it with Dracula, and it kind of showed him kind of like musing about the modern world, which is I think how an immortal would probably look at things, and kind of he was like kind of reflecting on kind of how things have changed and something. It was kind of cool. I thought it was interesting. So there's one where they were trying to take kind of the old school approach with Count Dracula and do something a little different, but still kind of in the vein of maybe kind of like a gothic horror, at least at the start for sure. But yeah, it's funny. I think you're right. There's a lot of focus on kind of the romantic aspects of vampires nowadays. The other thing that often gets talked about with vampires nowadays is the immortality, right? Like immortality comes up all the time, and there's like there are some shows where like a person wants to become a vampire because they want to be immortal and stuff like that, right? Like people are seeking it out, or they're serving the vampire so that they will be immortal eventually and stuff. And again, I not to say that that wasn't present in folklore, because there were beliefs that vampires would kind of just last. There were other beliefs that they wouldn't; they'd actually like go away after a while. But there were certainly folkloric precedents to a vampire that was around for hundreds of years or something potentially. But I feel like a lot is made of that nowadays with the immortality. Probably again because it's speaking to the audience, right? Like we don't need we don't need vampires to explain away like disease or a drought or whatever. That's all been kind of dealt with, but we still kind of have this fear of aging and death, right? And so then you introduce this vampire character that has sort of avoided that. I wouldn't say they've overcome it necessarily because they're cursed in their state, right? But they've somehow avoided death, and I think that kind of resonates with people because that is something that science has yet to conquer. But at the same time, in these shows, the vampire, as I said, is cursed because of it, and now they have to live this sort of kind of strange existence. And I think maybe that also kind of speaks to us too, that they've kind of subverted the natural order or something like that by the state of undeath. So I think that has a resonance for people.
Yeah, I agree. It's a lot of different elements there. Shay, what do you got on your end?
I'm just still trying to decipher between the two differences, as in, now having to live on forever and ever and ever until your body's whichever century you're in, however it goes away, is also a way that people are like, oh, the poor bad, they kill people, but
right.
Like you said, that sad heroine, or what's the word?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Heroine's
absolutely.
a woman, isn't it? Yeah, sorry.
But yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. It's this kind of whether they're a sympathetic villain or kind of an anti-hero or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that makes for a good story because you have a complicated main character. And so there's things to explore there, should the vampire just destroy him or herself, or are they going to go on and, can they be blamed for that and things like that. So it's interesting. And I think people kind of do different takes on it and stuff like that.
Right.
But,
right.
Well, I was just going to say, I will also say, like, the notion that the vampire kind of, like, in modern shows, like, vampires kind of, like, live normal lives a little bit. Like, they go to parties and things and stuff, right? Like, you might bump into a vampire and not realize it. Again, they're kind of infiltrated or something. Or, like, the vampire has this spooky old house or whatever. Like, oh, that's where the vampire lives. Or lives in a castle or whatever. Like, they didn't have normal, like, in folklore, they didn't have normal lives. Right, they were dead people, and so they were in a cemetery somewhere, and they would come out usually at night and terrorize the living, and then they would return to their graves. They weren't like hanging out in a castle, or they weren't like a mysterious count or nobleman or something, or something like that. That's very much kind of going into the 19th century literary tradition, where you had this mysterious character who turns out, who's doing things and turns out to be a vampire. While in folklore, it was like, no, the vampire's in that grave over there that's got the person's name on it, and they died 2 years ago, and now they're coming back and killing us, so we need to do something.
All I can picture is like Vampire Diaries. my daughter watched that for a very long time.
That was a big show.
It was. That's what I'm saying, but people romanticize it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely they do.
Like, so cool. But that's not where it started.
Oh, no. Not at all. I mean, it started, with people. It started with people trying to explain some kind of malady or tragedy that was going on, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's interesting too because as I said, it's been around. Like, these beliefs were in a number of different places. There were actually vampire incidents in New England in the 17 and 1800s. So, like, one of the most famous cases of that is Mercy Brown. Shay, I'm not sure if you've ever visited the gravesite of Mercy Brown.
No, I haven't yet. No.
I haven't been out east yet.
Oh. So the Mercy Brown incident, that happened. It was the late 1800s, right, in the town of Exeter, Rhode Island. You had the Brown family, and the Brown family, the mother had died of tuberculosis. What we call now tuberculosis, which then was known as consumption. So you have the mother who had died of consumption. Then, like a year or two later, the eldest daughter also died of consumption. Then some years later, Mercy Brown, at the age of 19, dies of consumption. And so now all you have left is the father, George, and the grown son, Edwin. Edwin also is showing the symptoms of consumption. And he actually spends a couple years in Colorado Springs hoping to get cured, but returns shortly after the death of his sister Mercy. In the late 1800s, the medical science didn't have any kind of real cure or correct explanation for what caused consumption. They thought it might be like the moist air and the cold air and stuff like that, which is why they thought Colorado would be good because it was like warmer or drier or whatever. There was really nothing there. So, and it would kind of just like move through families, right? So you have this guy George who has watched his wife, his two daughters pass away, and now his son is slowly moving in the same direction, right? So you can kind of imagine the fear and the desperation, right, of like, sort of just slowly watching, members of your family just pass away like that. And the doctors can't do anything. So some of the neighbors sort of present this folk belief to him, and they say, it's possible that the dead are causing the living to die. That one of the people who had previously died is now causing Edwin's illness and death. And so they kind of have this kind of plan. They say, well, we need to exhume the bodies. And at first, I think George is like, he declines. He doesn't want to do it, but eventually he gives in. So the people, they go along with they asked like the local medical examiner, a doctor, to come with them, who I think that he does it. He's not into it or anything, but I think he kind of goes anyway. They exhume the bodies of the mother and the older sister. And when they look at those bodies, and those bodies have decomposed to the point that they're beyond suspicion, right? They're too far gone. There's nothing, right. They're not seeing what they believe to be the vampiric signs, right? But then they turn to Mercy. Now, Mercy had died, I think it was like in January, and this is like a few months later or something like that. So they look at her body, and it looks to them sort of unnaturally fresh and well preserved. And then they cut out the heart and they cut out the liver because they believe that if those organs had blood in them, that was an indication that the corpse was stealing the life from the living. So they do this. They do find blood, though the doctor says that what they're seeing is to be expected. But that was enough for the people involved. They were like, here's our proof. This dead girl is causing her brother to die, right? She is causing his illness. She is stealing his vitality. So they take the heart and the liver, and they burn them on a rock in the cemetery. And they take the ashes of those burned organs and they mix the ashes into water. They then give that water to Edwin to drink as a cure for his consumption. Unfortunately, though not surprisingly, this cure does not work. And then Edwin passes away sometime later. And this belief of burning the organ and consuming the ashes, I found references to this to this belief in Romania as well. So this isn't like unique to New England or something. But so you have a case there, and this is the late 1890s, and so the papers pick this story up, and it kind of gets sensationalized a bit, and the papers will write some articles about it and whatnot, and but you can you sort of put yourself in the mindset of the people involved, and you can only imagine sort of the fear and the desperation that would drive them to do these things. But you see that in a variety of kind of vampire accounts.
Now, do you think this I'm going to go out on a limb here, but in that time there was a lot of people had faith and belief in God, and God was good, and do you think it was kind of a coping mechanism for they needed to find an alternative to it? Couldn't just be happening, there had to be a reason.
Absolutely. I think people of the past, and again, the Mercy Brown incident, it was like the 1890s, so it's not that, like, it's long ago, but not that long ago. But this was a rural area, so there was, and that came into play with the articles too, like the difference between sort of like the cities and the country and stuff. But as you go further back in time, I think people believed strongly that the supernatural world had a very kind of real presence and effect on their daily lives, right? Like, they believed that, if something bad was happening, if something was going on, it was just as likely to be a supernatural cause as it was to be anything else, right? And so I think that informed a lot of their kind of decision making and the assumptions that they reached regarding what was going on. So I think you have these people, they're living in this maybe a tightly knit community, and they're seeing person after person get sick, pass away, what have you. They're looking for answers, right? They're looking for some kind of rationale for it. And so there's something evil going on, right?
There has to be. That's in their mindset. Right. Yeah. In
their mindset, there's something evil happening. There's something supernatural going on, because to them it didn't make sense, right? They did not have the benefit of the knowledge we have today. Like, we understand germ theory and communicable disease and stuff like that. They didn't know about those things. They're just seeing one person who seemed healthy not long ago suddenly get sick and die like that, and then another person, like, that doesn't make sense to them. So they're looking for their answers, and so ultimately in these cases, in these vampire cases, the suspicion fell on the dead. They looked at, well, who's the first person to die? Oh, this all started when that person died. What's going on with that person? We need to take a look. We need to dig them up and look. And they would dig these people up, and they would often see like the corpse in a state of decomposition that they weren't familiar with. Most people I think most people would assume that, when somebody dies and during decomposition, you kind of just slowly turn into a skeleton and that's it. But that's not necessarily what can happen. People can, bodies can look fresh and be limber for longer periods of time. Bodies can actually, they can actually swell up. They can bloat due to the buildup of gases. So people would see these corpses and, oh my goodness, this person's gained weight, right? They look healthier now than they did when they died. Something's wrong. So to them, there was something wrong. And so,
but they're also looking for a reason. They're
absolutely. They're looking. I mean, they wouldn't have dug them up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're already there.
Exactly.
Like they've already their suspicions are already on the dead, right? They're trying to figure something out. They've arrived at this. It started this. They've dug them up. They're seeing something they don't see, and so then they go through these destruction rituals, or whatever, where we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to burn the organs, and I think that was probably providing sort of a catharsis for the people involved, this release of fear and tension. I mean, obviously, like, it wasn't, in these cases, it wasn't actually going to have an effect, but they believed it would, and it gave them an outlet for probably all of these fears that they were experiencing, kind of a focus for this kind of hysteria. And it probably made them feel less powerless. They thought, well, we can take action,
yeah.
we can destroy this evil and be victorious and survive. And so, it was either that or just say, we don't know what's going on, and we don't know when it'll stop, and oh well. Like, I don't think that doesn't sit well with people.
When did it go from the just burning of the organs to the burning of the vampires themselves? Do you know?
It really depended on the place. The different places had different traditions on it. So you might read one account that was, burning the organ, like with this Mercy Brown thing. There are other accounts where there's one account where they staked the vampire and then they burned the corpse. So they burned the burning was often kind of the last resort, where there was sort of nothing. You might do some other things or whatever, but burning was like there's nothing else to be done once you burn them, because you think about it, you've physically destroyed the corpse itself, so there's nothing left. You've
destroyed it in all senses once it's to ash.
It's that. There's nothing left. So, and again, it get back to that physicality of vampires, right? Where the vampire is a corpse that's coming to life, or it's somehow maintaining its vitality in the grave through sort of the illness and death of others, right? Of stealing life. But now you've destroyed that. You've destroyed the body, the thing that was either terrorizing you or stealing the life in some fashion. So that was usually the last or the ultimate act to be done against the vampire was burning it till it was nothing. And I mean, and that actually goes back. I found an account from the 12th century that talks about this village that was being terrorized by a corpse. It was like a revenant. And these two brothers, they dig up the body and they burn it to ashes. And as part of that story, that the vampire would kind of go through the town at night, and it was believed that its breath had poisoned the air and had caused a plague. So when they burned the body, as the story goes, the plague ended. Right, so the flames almost had this like purifying effect even on the air. So it's interesting, and that story it's a 12th century account from Great Britain, right? So like this belief that the dead were to be feared and could cause harm, it goes very far back and goes into places that, I mean, normally you think vampires, you're thinking like 1700s or Eastern Europe or whatever, but it's much broader than that, because I think it speaks to it speaks to the populace on kind of a fundamental level, right? Of this fear of the dead, what the dead could do.
It's also a fear of death itself, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
They need that outlet. Is that the word? Is that what I'm looking for?
Sure, I'd say so. Yeah, I mean, there was a fear of death, and so what's closer to death than someone who just died?
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So there was a fear that the dead could bring you with them, could make them like you, make you dead along with them.
Right.
And the dead would somehow try to steal your life in the process. Right? So, that dead person probably doesn't want to be dead. They're going to try to take my life to avoid being fully dead. So again, when you put yourself in the mindset of the people at the time, it kind of you can see how it progressed and how they could arrive at some of these things.
Because these days we know a little bit more about science, but you're talking back then, they didn't know everything we knew. So I do get it. I really do.
Yeah, absolutely. They didn't have the benefit of our knowledge, and so they were, with the tools at hand, trying to make sense of the world around them.
The best they could.
The best they could, exactly.
So Mama Deb had a question a little while ago, and it kind of fits into this. What if, her question is, what if the corpse wasn't buried, but it was cremated? If the person they thought, would that change things? They couldn't dig them up? Have you heard anything of that?
No, if the corpse was cremated, well, first of all, I think back, in hundreds of years ago, times gone by, I don't think cremation probably wasn't as common, just because it was probably a lot of time and effort to sort of burn the body to that extent that it would be nothing.
A little bit more difficult. More.
It would probably there'd probably be more work into it. So I think from the accounts I've read, it's always there's a body somewhere, there's a corpse somewhere that's still intact. And that's kind of the fear. I think if a corpse had been cremated and burnt to ashes, that's what they would do to get rid of a vampire to begin with. So at that point, if the fear fell upon that person, I think it would probably have been interpreted as something else, something like a ghost or something, rather than a vampire.
Yeah, I get you. Are you into ghosts too? I
mean, I certainly have an interest.
Our hour is up, so I just want to... Darren, do you have any more questions that you got to...
Yeah, I got one.
Yeah, go ahead. I just want to make sure you get your questions in before we close up.
So, what is an ideal, if you're given a chance to do is to bring your books to life, to film, what is an AP Sylvia's version or ideal movie to make?
I mean, I think, would it be starring me?
Sure.
The title role.
Hey, you could pull it off. You're young and you're cute. You could pull it off.
Well, thank you. I think, for me, I think it would be cool if they made a movie that stuck closer to folklore and tried to encapsulate the kind of the gripping fear and sort of the dread that was encompassing a community that then arrives at the vampire. So to me, I would like to actually. Did you ever see the movie The Witch? Did you ever see that? Did you ever see that one?
I haven't.
Well, that one kind of it kind of
it's
plays
a little
more
out
to like
there for me, but yeah.
Yeah, well, it kind of references folklore a bit more, so it kind of creates a lot of it kind of creates like atmosphere a bit. I don't know. I would like to see a movie where like it would sort of try to. It would be kind of a slow burn of like you're in this kind of rural community and you're seeing one person get sick and another, and you're seeing people try to come to terms with it, and sort of you sort of see the fear spread, and then ultimately it results in the vampire exhumation and stuff like that. And then whether or not you want to take it to like a supernatural level or not, you kind of have to decide on that. But I don't know, something like that. I think it would be fun to sort of go back to the original beliefs and try to interpret that into a film.
So the opposite of Twilight.
Yeah.
That sounds good. That's not a complaint, but I just mean...
I'd watch it.
I personally would go into another direction, but that, those books and films have, I'm sure, influenced a whole generation. And, in the future, vampire movies and shows...
Right, but is that good or bad? Because it takes away from the origins of where vampires came from. It's... People don't...
I don't mind. I mean, to me, vampires have been changing for hundreds of years. And even the vampires we have today, just even if you showed the Bela Lugosi movie to someone in the 1700s who believed in vampires, they would be like, why is that guy a vampire? He's hanging out with everyone. And, they'd be like, why isn't he in his grave in the yard or whatever? But I don't know. I think they've been growing and changing over time. So I just try to go with it, and I think it's just going to speak to that generation. And I think that's why we still have vampires, is because they change and evolve. And if they had stayed static, then people might not be like the Halloween. Bored. People would get People would get bored.
They would get smarter and learn. So you'd be like, come on, we know that was just TB.
Right, so we got to change it around. You got to keep it fresh.
So
absolutely.
Here's the question of the night: do you really think there was ever such thing as a blood-sucking vampire?
I know there are spiritual beliefs that do include vampire-like entities and stuff like that. There are beliefs that do have that. People certainly believed it in the past, to a very real extent. There were even people. There was an account I briefly mentioned in my book in the 2000s in a rural village in Romania where they believed that a vampire was causing harm, and they exhumed a body and took action against the corpse. So some of those beliefs do still persist even today. Me personally, from what I've read and the accounts I've read, I'm not yet convinced that the bodies of the dead are actually clawing their way up and stuff like that. But yeah, hey, you never know. It's a big world out there.
True.
I like that answer.
Do you have any more questions before I have one last one?
Go ahead. You ask your last one.
So what can we expect from AP Sylvia in the future as to new books coming out?
Yeah, I've got a few different ideas rattling around in my head. I've also got I've got the blog locationsoflore.com where I write about, different places and stuff like that. So that kind of keeps my writing chops fresh. But I don't know. I would like to explore folklore in some more ways, maybe look at some other beliefs, maybe some different supernatural creatures and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm not sure, but I think I've got a few different possibilities ahead.
That That's good.
Right? They got the show out there called Lore. I don't know if you've watched that one at all. I think it was that Netflix thing.
Yeah, I've seen some episodes of that, and I know it's also it's based on a podcast.
Oh.
Yep. So that's for me. That's pretty much what I got.
Awesome.
You got any of that thoughts there, Shay?
I have the normal couple last questions here, but hey, if you ever want to go on a paranormal investigation and want to meet up at Midfield or anywhere down there, let me know, because we've had some crazy stuff happen. And I mentioned that because that was the picture I happened to see of you, and I knew instantly where it was. So let me know.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, seriously, that could be your next blog. Like, you go on a,
I'm game.
Have you ever been on a full paranormal investigation?
No.
See?
I've been to places that are supposedly haunted, but I've never done like a, investigation, with the different equipment and all that.
It's fun. You'd like it.
I'm very close to there, so I'm right over the border.
I got my own team in the Midwest, so
cool.
Yeah, if you ever go to the Midwest, we can go see Darren. That's my plan. Get out that way to see everybody.
And then we all go down and meet with everybody else in Iowa.
Before I forget, AP, what you want to throw out where you're sorry, I was reading chat. Where people can find you on social media?
Sure thing. So my website is locationsoflore.com. It has links to my different social media accounts. I'm AP Sylvia Writes on Twitter. Writes is in like writes a book. And I'm AP Sylvia on Instagram. And again, those links are on Locations of Lore, so you can find them there.
Awesome. And where can people find your book?
Sure. My book is Vampires of Lore: Traits and Modern Misconceptions. You can find it basically on all the online bookstores, Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million. Last time I checked, some Barnes and Noble's locations in like New York area and LA area had the book in stock. You can also just bring it in for you, order your copy or something like that if you'd like to do that.
Awesome. And I'm having internet trouble, guys, so we're just wrapping this up just in time. If you guys didn't hear that, you can find them at any bookstore, any online, Amazon. If you have any questions on where you can find his book, send me a message and I'll make sure he gets the information and I'll pass it on to you, because you're breaking up a little. I'm not sure why, but all of a sudden my internet is like freezing up.
Must be freezing in Manhattan. Massachusetts, I mean. Sorry.
Good try. Good try, though. That was funny. So, on that note, guys, thank you very much, AP. It was awesome. Thank you so much for giving me a second chance coming back. I really enjoyed this.
Gotta have him back again.
Yes, next
year.
Thank you.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I'm already booked up until like March, but next year we'll have you back, and we'll have you back definitely when you write the next book. I've heard great. I've read the reviews on this book. I haven't read the book. Again, I'm blind right now, but
I'll go get it tomorrow.
Yeah, I've heard really good reviews on this book, like independent reviews, not somebody trying to kiss my ass like, oh, you're a guest. These are like real reviews. So,
can I get those bifocals out?
I gotta just go get new glasses since I broke mine, or something, So.
Yeah, it's all good, Shay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've been very happy. A lot of people have been have had very positive things to say about the book, so it's been very encouraging.
It is very positive. I'm trying to stall to try to read who is my next guest. Next week is I think his name's Gavin. I think his last name is pronounced Davies. We're going to be talking about UFOs and aliens next week. So that's a first on this show, believe it or not. It's a paranormal show, but we've never actually talked about aliens. So I can't wait for that. All right, guys. We will see you next week. You two hold on 1 second. Thank you to everybody in chat. I cannot scroll back. My chat froze up, but I know Allison joined us. Afterwards, the Beholder joined us. Kim's in there. Darren's in there. Yep. And I think I got everybody else at the beginning. If not, guys, I love you. Thank you for listening live or listening later.
Mallory.
We really appreciate it. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.